The time for small thinking is over. The time for trivial fights is behind us.
President Trump appealing for unity in his speech to Congress this week, a moment that now feels like it was a long time ago. And we're back with the panel. Dana, President Trump gave in that speech to Congress what most people think was a very effective speech, laying out his agenda. But we now hear that there are serious splits among Republicans in Congress on the issue of Obamacare, repeal and replace, and tax reform. So what kind of shape, forget Russia, what kind of shape is the Trump agenda in?
I think it's actually in better shape than maybe it looks on paper, and that behind the scenes, because you have good cooperation between President Trump, the vice president, because of his relationship with a lot of members on the Hill, and then McConnell, who runs his caucus very well. So there will be an Obamacare repeal and replacement. Not everyone's going to agree. And I do think that President Trump will have to find time in his schedule to get out there and provide some explanation in the way that only he can, which is very direct and explains to people exactly how he thinks it will work and that everyone's going to be taken care of. At the same time, you have other planes circling above the airport, and that would be the Supreme Court nomination that has got to figure out a way to get to land. And you're going to have a debt ceiling debate in a couple of weeks as well. So lots of things happen. You've got to figure out how to sequence these things. Obamacare repeal and replacement will be first.
Well,
it'll be hard.
Let's talk about that, Bob, because there is talk on Obamacare that House Speaker Ryan is going to end up putting a bill on the floor that he knows some conservatives in his own caucus think is too soft, still creates a government entitlement, uses these refundable tax credits to pay for it, and basically dare conservatives to block it, saying, if you'd want to stop repealing Obamacare, it's on you. That's a pretty high-risk strategy, isn't it?
And if you take people and put them on sodium pentothal, the truth serum, and say, do you understand Obamacare? Everyone will agree they're not sure that they do. There's splits in the Republican Party in the House and in the Senate. There's splits in the White House. It's going to be interesting to see if this comes together at all in a reasonable period of time.
Do you think that Ryan might really do that, not know that he has the votes and just put it out there and basically play chicken with House conservatives?
Well, Ryan has said privately he thinks he has a good relationship with Trump on these domestic issues and that he can kind of call the shots. We're going to see. I'm not going to say a year or two again, but this could take a long time. And there's this sense of, oh, you can push a button and take a very complex troubled law and fix it is a fantasy.
Laura, let's drill down a little bit on a couple of the big political differences in Obamacare. One has to do with this question of how you're going to help lower income people pay for insurance, people who aren't covered by Medicaid, and there's this idea of refundable tax credits. People would get money. As you know, some of the more conservative people say, hey, that's just another name for subsidies. It's the same deal, and you're creating a new entitlement. There's also this question about the 11 million people who gain coverage under the expansion of Medicaid. What happens to them? Those are really sizable issues.
It's always hard when you create a new entitlement to pull back on that entitlement. That's why elections matter. When President Obama won in 2008, he came in, he passed Obamacare with not a single Republican vote, and now it's such a labyrinthine mess of a piece of legislation that it's like that old game Kerplunk. You pull one stick out and the whole thing falls apart. I would say this, Chris, and a lot of conservatives who call into my radio show, they believe Donald Trump ran on a very serious reform agenda, that you weren't just going to be tinkering with some of these behemoths of government programs. You were really going to tackle them. And that means bring the cost of health care down. He talked about that a little bit in his speech. The prescription drug prices, which are skyrocketing. The cost of health care, which it needs to be busted up and dealt with by removing the antitrust protections that health care providers get. Those are things that a lot of the Republicans don't want to tackle. That would actually bring health care costs down by almost 60 to 70%, says experts like Ramin Osqui, a renowned cardiologist in Washington. That would bring care down so much that people could go to the doctor for a sore throat or a sprained ankle, pay nothing for it. But we're going to tinker with the mandate and do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Meanwhile, we might leave this IPAB board, otherwise known as the death panel, still in the legislation. It still could survive in the Ryan legislation, which could lead to huge cuts in coverage down the road for all Americans. Dana's right. The president needs to use his political capital and his election victory and go to Capitol Hill and be confident in what he wants and make that case to the American people. I don't think it can all be on Paul Ryan's shoulders. I think it's got to be a broad-based pitch for real reform.
But let me bring Peter in here, because as Laura describes it, there is a huge political debate. Even after 7 years of talking about repealing Obamacare, there's still a huge debate about how to replace it. And then you've also got the tax reform and this huge fight, and there are a bunch of them, but the one that sort of has risen to the surface is about the border adjustment tax and whether you're going to tax imports coming in or not. Do you get the sense that the Trump White House has a clear strategy, both in terms of political strategy, legislative strategy, and also in terms of substance of how to get both of these through?
What's really interesting about President Trump's team is that they're actually not on the same page on a lot of these issues, and that they're playing
Even with each other,
and that they're playing these debates out pretty publicly. I mean, on the border adjustment tax, as you mentioned, you've got the Bannon wing of the White House, which says yes, we should tax these imports, protect American industries. You've got the Gary Cohn, who's the National Economics Advisor wing, saying no, that's not the way we want to go. And they don't know, and they're having these fights out in a very public way, which I think is different than some other White Houses.
But how do you push legislation, tough legislation, through Congress if you don't have a clear strategy coming from the top, from the president?
That's ultimately going to be the key, right? Does the president make up his mind? At this point, he hasn't on some of these big issues, and he has to sit down and say, okay, this is the way we're going. Once he does that, then Republicans will start to fall in behind him, presumably. But at the moment when he hasn't made his decision, there's a free-for-all, and everybody feels entitled and emboldened to have this debate because he hasn't said yet.
We got about 30 seconds left, though. I mean, I think it would be fair to say that this president is good on the broad strokes, not so interested or so good on the fine detail. There's a lot of fine detail here. Well, is going to be a tax credit? Is there not going to be? What's going to happen on the death panel board? Is this president going to get engaged in that and start calling people and saying, I need your support for...
Well, he just said, just last week, I think, he said, look, who knew it was so complicated to do health care? Well, a lot of people knew it was that complicated. He's discovering it. He's a new president. He's not experienced in politics. So we'll see how he learns.
Thanks, panel. See you next Sunday.